Now this was originally going to be a below the line video, but it became so long I decided it could only be a standalone. Battlefield 5 has apparently, as reported in the Wall Street Journal, so far had extremely poor pre-order sales. Now before we get into that, I want to just skim over two other points as well. Firstly, yes, there is the resignation of Patrick Soderlund in the mix, and what I will say is that I don't think it's sensible to overread into a person resigning. As usual, and as tempting as it is to want to read into that situation, somebody could resign for any reason, and I think it's unlikely a senior member of any development team would resign purely over poor pre-sales that could be attributed to many different factors. So I don't think it's sensible or helpful to make a judgment about it, but people will, but I'm not going to go there. The second interesting, but not at all surprising thing to me is how very few of the so-called Battlefield game changers have addressed this issue of poor pre-sales in videos. I had a little browse around on YouTube today, and I know that's not going to be a shock to anybody, because whatever they say or rationalize to themselves, the majority of these people are the yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir of Battlefield fanboyism, with the token video being critical thrown in to, you know, make it palatable. Now, when I was and have been covering Battlefield for a long time now, much more heavily of course around the time of BF3 to BF4 and so on, I've always called out the major missteps in no uncertain terms. Most of my reviews about certain things have been pretty savage, and I often talk about the business elements as well, in much the same way that I have continually highlighted things like premium, season passes, whatever you want to call them, as being an extremely flawed exploitative concept that nobody should support. And yes, I'm aware that's not a thing in Battlefield 5, but just in general I'm saying this is something which has been an issue, and again, it's not something that really got called out when it clearly is something that is just a fucking disaster. If a YouTuber or producer is sincere in covering a game without heavy corporate bias, why wouldn't they talk about a topic as juicy as a shocking lack of pre-sales? That seems like an amazing talking point for a game you want to focus heavily on. Well, unlike my initial point about Soderlund with this one, I would say read into it all you want, because you should. There's a reason why people will not talk about this if they are aligned in a certain way, and that's because they don't want to rock the boat, they don't want to miss out. What I would say to those people is, don't be afraid, say these things, because these are the things which need to be said. Okay, now enough ranting, let's actually talk about this. So, Battlefield 5, poor pre-sales. Why? It's the women, right? It must be the women. No. I know this is likely the favourable thing in the climate of 2018 for people to want to gravitate towards screaming, "We told you so." I find this to be highly unlikely speculation. As with most things in the world, one factor is very rarely a sole cause. While a percentage of players got all ragey and foaming in the mouth about the very idea that a female soldier would step foot onto a World War II battlefield, I think that even most of those people, even though they'd never admit it, would probably still consider buying the game. And let's be clear, pre-sales are not everything. They are important for sure, they provide financial security for the budget of a title. However, could it be as equally simple that, as I've seen here in my comment section for years, that people are simply just waiting for release, or even waiting for the beta before they decide to commit to purchase? I think partly true, but again, I think there are other things going on here. And let's just say it now, this whole thing about the women, I get why some people maybe are triggered by this a little bit or whatever, but the thing is, when you're actually in on the ground and playing the game, it's just not anything, you know, like when you're in on the ground and you're playing the game, you barely even see what other player character models are, which, to my mind, and this is the thing again, this is why I feel like EA, they put it front and center. It's fine, but it's their call and it clearly backfired on them. It feels like in this day and age, no matter what you do, there's always going to be that percentage of the audience which get incredibly triggered about something. It just turns out that currently, in this existing climate right now, women in games and just, you know, online in general seems to be an incredible flashpoint for people to get immensely triggered by. And this whole situation was something which really didn't warrant the huge overreactions which have occurred. Quite honestly, if this is something which frustrates you that badly, as I said on my other video, you really need to assess things in your life. Because whilst it's true to say that we can have a conversation about accuracy and authenticity and whether they should have been more clear about, you know, messaging in their game, especially around that original reveal, that's definitely a conversation to be had. But if your whole thing is just freaking out because there happens to be a female character in the game, it's just kind of sad, really. So what seems to me a much more likely scenario, and there are a litany of other factors, and honestly they don't actually need that much of a heavy discussion, they really need to be just outlined because as I've discussed many of these already at length, but this does bring me to the title of the topic today, that EA is slowly killing Battlefield. Now these poor pre-sales highlight one other important thing, and it's not about the success or failure of the game itself. What it shows is that people's confidence in Battlefield as a franchise, and possibly even DICE, but certainly EA, is shattered. EA is largely to blame for this. They were the ones responsible for the astonishingly incompetent loot box fiasco around Star Wars Battlefront, which really damaged them in multiple ways and probably had wide-reaching impact. They're also generally in charge of the marketing for Battlefield 5, which so far has been a fucking disaster. The initial trailer and announcement event were far from what you would call expertly crafted, and the subsequent marketing has been fairly reserved. Perhaps because that initial event rubbed people the wrong way, so then they didn't want to push their luck, and you can just see how all these things kind of create ripple effects ongoing. I find it baffling at this point that a company like EA can't seem to fathom what it is their customers actually want. It's shambolic. They should know that when it comes to World War II, what people enjoy about that period more than anything is the authenticity, the atmosphere. And before some smart asses in the comments start to tell me about how expertly scanned the outfits and weapons are and blah 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 blah, you're missing the point by a mile. Apparel and atmosphere are not the same thing. Context is all important. And as I said in another video, why they did not simply come out and just state frankly, hey, so with Battlefield 5, what we've decided to do is make a game inspired by the background of World War II, but it's a very alternate reality because we wanted to push things in directions that wouldn't make any sense at all in a true World War II scenario. Now, some people will tell you that they didn't do this because it should be obvious. It should be obvious to anybody is that case. And people have loved to rub that in people's faces on Twitter with their little gifs and, you know, people with flamethrowers on horseback and blah, blah, blah. And like, oh, look at this, look at this. How could anybody think that that's not the case? Oh, you fucking idiots. Look, let me tell you something that I was repeatedly told by art directors when I worked as a designer in London, okay? Nothing is ever obvious enough. You literally have to spell it out for people in alphabet blocks or they're not going to get it. So being all like condescending and what have you just doesn't help anything and it doesn't change anything. So now there's another point which of course is back to EA, and that's that they want Battlefield always to be a game that pulls in a massive audience. Something I've talked about before, makes sense, they're a business, they got shareholders, they want to make the dollars. Except that in order to do this, they run the game of covering all the bases as widely as possible. Check every box. And this somehow includes keeping an allure of this being a historical game, when it's simultaneously about people running around hip-firing MG42s with red dot sights, Royale style baby, that historical World War II Royale. And let's not get started on the more in-your-face things, because it's all been said at this point. One thing that Supra said to me on Twitter today was, don't misread the player base of Battlefield, because at this point, the player base of Battlefield is essentially Fortnite, but just mildly more mature, and that's probably the most depressing thing I've read all year. Then of course comes their response. Now I've recently seen some people in EA stating that yes, there are legit discussions to be had about historical inaccuracy and how some people feel this is inappropriate in Battlefield 5 and how it's been covered and portrayed. But these conversations have been overshadowed by the more triggered, obnoxious people that we all know already exist on the internet. However, that seems a pretty shifted tack from what they were saying around the original trailer, which was basically don't like it, don't buy it. I think those people at EA who made those statements possibly underestimated how many people would take that literally. It kind of reminds me of Paul Feig, the director of the unwatchable Ghostbusters reboot, which was another example of a catastrophic misjudgment of what its audience actually wanted. It bears a stark similarity in that after the trailer for that movie that was rightly savaged and panned very harshly, downvoted just about as much as the Battlefield 5 trailer was. Paul Feig came out saying that he was proud of the trailer and that basically people could suck it up. I'm paraphrasing, but that later changed in tone to people shouldn't judge the movie based just on the trailer, they should judge it on the movie itself. They did, and it was a fucking nightmare. Now, I'm not saying Battlefield 5 is going to be anything as horrific as Ghostbusters 2016, there isn't much that could be placed on that level of sheer insultingly misjudged concepts. However, I do think it's interesting how, as I said in my World War III video yesterday, that one big issue these days is just in general people's inability to just hold their hands up and say, okay, look, we got this wrong, we fucked it up, You know, after the Battlefield 5 trailer, it took some time, but some people, and I apologize for not actually having the quotes to hand, but I know that some people from DICE came out and said the reveal event was poorly judged. The point I'm trying to make in all of this is that EA doesn't seem to have a fundamental grasp of the people they're mainly selling to. They seem to be trying to fit into the lukewarm mainstream of games that pander to all. And honestly, while that in some respects is kind of a laudable thing, you shouldn't embrace that attitude at the expense of your existing audience, because that really is cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's like saying to your fans, haha, fuck you, we know you're going to lap this shit up and we just simply don't care. And I would refer you back to the EA execs saying, don't like it, don't buy it. That level of arrogant self-assuredness has definitely never been regretted before. However you spin it, these poor Battlefield 5 pre-sales really come back to EA. Let's go through some of these reasons. Okay. People feel burned by years of contempt for the consumers. DLC that leaves people also feeling burned and kind of like done over. A loot box fiasco so incompetently executed that I will remind was also defended by some producers initially who are so unashamedly in the pocket of EA until then they saw which way the wind was blowing and then decided to subsequently round on them as well, if only to save face. How about not outrightly stating something is deliberately inaccurate whilst masquerading as a historically sympathetic title? And then also a declining series that has realised too little too late that people do not like the chaos Battlefield is well known for. It's a little Trevor Noah quote there for you. Lastly, I'll finish by saying that in my opinion, one of the biggest reasons for the declining pre-sales, as I previously mentioned, people have no faith in this series anymore. And I personally put the cause of that squarely at the door of the chaotic Zerg grindfest that the game has become. Now, some people like that for sure, but I sincerely believe many more people do not enjoy that. And I've had conversations that I can't explicitly reference, but that do corroborate this. Just in relation to that, those who would simply point to sales as being a means of judging a title's success, I've seen this happen again in other producers' videos where they say, well, look at the sales and blah, blah, blah. This is ignorant in the extreme and is not looking at the holistic picture. Sales don't just give you an idea of how successful a title is. What they show you is how well people have been convinced by a variety of factors to purchase a game, and much of that is marketing. What actually shows you if a game is truly successful is player retention, and this is something that has been problematic for Battlefield since BF4. It's one thing to get somebody to buy a game, but when that person enters into the game, finds the gameplay and general player experience and player base frustrating and miserable with nobody working together, it's understandable why those players would just say, fuck this, and move on. Now that is the core issue that Battlefield has, and it's been ignored for too long. Now they are trying to resolve that in this iteration, but as I've been saying for over 5 years now, the writing was on the wall and I've been predicting it was coming, and now maybe it is actually finally starting to hit. Now, I'm not predicting the apocalypse here either. This isn't going to kill DICE, it's probably not going to kill Battlefield, but look at games like Siege. They did poorly at release and they bounced back pretty hard. Could that happen with Battlefield 5? It's definitely possible. As I said in my recent verdict on the alpha period, which I'll link at the end of this video, Battlefield 5 is actually doing a lot of things right. It's certainly trying to turn the issue of the general chaos and lack of teamwork around, but truly, as I've said, it might already be past the point of no return, and it is certainly not helped at all by EA's ongoing litany of issues that have just burned, frustrated and alienated the consumers that they're actually trying to sell to, which, why would you do that? I haven't a clue. Time will tell us what the resolution of all of this is going to be, and as always, I'm interested in your thoughts, so please contribute them down below. This is Looting Guys, and I'll see you next time.